Good morning, friends. I am Kabira, and I wanted to share with you about pleasure in winning and why we do things. So you may or may not know that I am working with a group of women, and we're healing from our eating disorders. And one of the themes that came up in the group, and definitely came up when I was in the healing process, was if I'm not focused on food and exercise and, changing my body or hiding myself, what do I do with myself? Because boredom tends to be a place where we can get triggered. And where, without even realizing it, and I'm going to speak not just to those of you who may struggle with an eating disorder, because I think this is a human issue. How do we meet ourselves in boredom and loneliness, but also how do we unconsciously deny ourselves our real pleasure? And I think ancestrally, it's fascinating to see that, of course, there's no way that we could deny that we are affected by our global culture and by our own ancestral history. And most of our cultures, have had hard lives and believe like life should be hard, pleasure is something you do on the sidelines. And that, and also like certain spiritual practices, not just some of them, but a lot of them, if you look at it, it's like about denial of pleasure, and that's how you get to God. Where we could say, and I'm not a tantric yogi, I don't know what I am, I'm Kat, but at least to me, one of the tenets of the tantric practice is through pleasure, we find God. Now, I don't mean pleasure, because I know for me, when I first started learning about or considering pleasure, for me it was like partying hard or going out dancing every night and like sleeping around and, doing some drugs, drink a little bit. I'm talking about just the basic nature of pleasure. Like, that right now I just lit some incense and it smells good. That gives me pleasure. I purposefully was like, I need to wear some pink right now. That gave me pleasure. There's a specific cup that I love to have my coffee in, and a different cup that I like to have my tea in, and a different cup that I like to have my water in. That gives me pleasure. Watching the way that the light changes and the clouds change and the sounds of the insects at 5:30 a.m., that gives me pleasure. So kind of more the pleasure of being. And if we extend that, though, how do we build our lives? Do we deny ourselves pleasure? And I'm talking around, this is the year of 2020, the year of COVID. And I realized that I haven't let myself get a piano again, even though I love playing. I've been making up songs since I was 4. But it was almost like this, it's COVID, we should like save our money and, it's tough times. And instead of realizing like, there are ways to still get things even if you don't have money with integrity. There may be someone who has a piano nearby. There may be someone who's like, I've got this piano I want to get rid of. There are possibilities. So where we kind of block ourselves from pleasure. And sometimes there may even just be, it's not like a practical financial reason, but it's just more like our habit. This is really what I want to name is your habit of denying yourself. And you may not even realize it. You may not let yourself buy the lotion that you want to buy, or you always make yourself get like the second tier of something. Almost like I'm just not allowed to have it. For those of us a lot of us come from generations of wars. And so there's that idea of like, we must save everything. And, we never want that fear of using things up. It's interesting to see like, where are these thoughts and beliefs coming from? So, speaking specifically around pleasure, where do you let yourself do something for the fun of it? Like, I know that I love playing the piano. And actually, one of the reasons why I stopped, I did take lessons. One of the reasons why I stopped was, I just want to make my own rhythms. And I just want to like make my own sounds. And there was just a way that I would get off, like that the piano would speak to me that I didn't get in lessons. I got stressed out, like, okay, I gotta do it with your patterns, and and it just didn't like light me up. And it actually wasn't until I was really stuck in my anorexia that I found myself in front of the piano, kind of playing for God, like looking for God through sound. And I loved it because it was nothing that anyone taught me. And I played to myself. I was like, I don't want other people's likes and dislikes. Like, I want this to be for me because I'm doing it for the pleasure of it. And of course, there's something to be said that, like, I know as a teacher, I only get to teach if I have students, So the other day I was teaching to a live class, and I felt so grateful because I'm like, if you guys didn't show up, I wouldn't be able to teach. And there's this thing that happens when I teach. And for those of you who teach, you might know what I'm talking about, where like, you just become this channel, and it's just this beautiful opening where it's like we're all touched by God. There's this grace that comes through that you couldn't have predicted, you couldn't have controlled. And it's that feeling that I live for. Where's the grace? And I definitely have a personality, and those of us who struggle with eating disorders and those of us who have been raised in certain environments, we can be very good at being perfectionists and hard on ourselves. And you may even think like, well, I'm not as hard on myself these days, or I'm not as much of a perfectionist. But I really want you to like check, is that true? So, there are things where I think it's important that we keep sacred, doing things for the sheer pleasure of it, for the joy of it, of not doing it because we need to have talent or we need to be the best. How many times have we held ourselves back because it's like, well, I'm not going to be any good at it, so I'm not going to do it. And of course, we could argue the only way you get good at stuff is through practice. Very, very, very true. But also, that we don't want to have our motivation to be, well, I'm doing it because I'm going to be the best. It's like we keep forgetting that the sheer act of it is the pleasure itself. Like, let's talk about writing a book. I love writing. It's like the thing that I have loved since I was a little kid. And, I've never yet professionally, I've published some things, but nothing like, like a real writer, right? But I do know that if I made my end game like that published book that, so many people are going to love, that would take me away from the sheer joy of why I love writing. Because there's this thing that happens before, during, and after that just gives me like everything's okay in this world and everything makes sense for a moment. And we all have those things. For some people it's surfing, for some people it's breastfeeding, for some people it's knitting, for some people, we could insert that. And it's really like, what are the ways that you can spend time that has nothing to do with achievement, that you would still do it even if you didn't improve? For example, I've been surfing since 2005. While I know how to handle the waves and I can paddle and, there's a certain strength I have more now, I finally was like, what? I actually don't ever want to surf big waves. I don't care if I ever surf a barrel. That's not interesting to me. The magic of surfing to me was like, oh, wow, like you can get out and you can paddle on this board. And like sometimes you see rainbows and like it's really cool to do it at sunrise, and then like you get to see turtles and fish, and there's other people there and you get to wave to them, and when there's a lull you can have cool conversations, and you just get to be in the salt water a lot. And then I just happen to be like, oh, and then suddenly you can paddle and catch waves, and oh, and it's fun to kind of like ride these waves. But I realized with my personality, it became not fun when it's like, and then you get held under and you can get thrown down and like scraped across a reef and you might die. That takes the joy out for me. Now, for some people, that's their thing. I've dated some big wave surfers. For me, that creates terror and overwhelm. Okay, like I'm like, what? I'm good. 7'2". I don't need to go smaller. It's cool. We're good. So it's getting honest with your limits and what gives you pleasure, because there are certain things where it's like you're going to love it and then you end up doing too much of it or it the wrong way and it ends up not being pleasurable anymore. I mean, I just thought about sex, right? You could do a little bit of it, you know, in a certain way, and it's like, oh my God, like radiance happening. Too much, and you're like, I don't know, can't sit anymore, not so fun, right? So it's all about moderation, and getting to be honest with why are you choosing the activities you're doing, you know? And for a lot of us, sometimes it's like, I'm doing it because I want to look good, or I want to be that kind of person. You know, especially I think about Instagram culture where it's so like before and after and like check me out and you know, like I'm doing it because I think I have to. Like a lot of yogis, when suddenly handstands became like a thing, you know, in yoga, suddenly yogis would confess to me like, I feel really stressed out, Kat, because I don't care about handstands. Is that okay? It's like, totally, you know, like let yourself care about what you care about and let yourself not care about what you don't care about. And can you give yourself that? So if you have high expectations on yourself and if you think, oh, I've got to be the best, first of all, that's going to actually kill the creative process and the fun. So if we're learning dance, if we're doing yoga, if we're learning a musical instrument, if you're learning pottery, if you're painting, if you're writing, we could insert other, if you're having sex, if you're trying too hard, it's going to kill it, okay? Even your healing process, if you try too hard to heal, you're going to kill the process, right? And it's a very masculine thing of like, if I really make effort and I stay focused, you know, like I'm going to get somewhere. And what about the feminine, which is just like, you know what, like if I'm driving a car, you know, stay with me on this. I'm driving a car, I've got my foot on the pedal, right? The feminine is like, oh wait, for a second, I take my hands off the steering wheel and my foot off the pedal. Holy shit, the car is still driving itself. I thought I was in charge of this car. I thought I was the one that was like, we're going here, I'm going there. There's some other force field going on. And when I teach energy work, that's basically what I'm teaching you is how do you get in touch with this force field? You know, we could call it the Tao, the flow, that is like carrying us all along. You know, it's the thing that birthed us. It's the thing that's going to carry us out when we die. It's the miracles. It's the magic. And a lot of times when we try too hard, we don't allow that to come in. Like I've got a lot of yoga teacher students where, you know, and it's understandable when you first learn to teach where you think, okay, I got to practice my sequence, I got to get it right, you know, and you got to learn your chops, you know, that we can apply that to any movement practice, music, yoga, you know, language. But at some point, you got to relax and allow spontaneity and some co-creation to come through, you know, because we've been indoctrinated that our teachers are humans. Or books, like something that is coming, you know, that first of all, someone else is the expert and we've got to like be less than to learn, or someone in the 3D realm. And I think the reason why I got into meditation and yoga like in 97 was, to me that the teachers were actually ancillary, and I was like, I am contacting the teacher. I am contacting the teacher. When I meditate, I am contacting the teacher, capital T, the teacher. And I was really in awe of like, wait a minute, you know, because I was a good student. You mean, I was amazed at just by sitting with myself. Things would come to me. And then I'd go to like a Dharma talk and I was like, yeah, totally. You know, when I was sitting, that came to me. And it's taking out, you know, think about the history of paradigm, right? That there's always like an external power and that we have to like give something up in order to get that. You know, there's always been like a middleman to God, you know, a middleman to power, a middleman. You got to get certified to be okay. And yes, we're going to talk about some integrity with stuff, like certain things you do need to make sure you've got like some qualifications for, okay? So, but it's like, Are you denying your own conduit to your own godness that's inside? And how do you find that? How do you trust yourself? That's a pleasure in itself. And it's so important, especially right now with what's happening on the planet. Everybody has their opinion. Everybody has their fear. Everyone has their manipulation. You do not want to get lost in that, right? Like, where's your godness? Okay, so I went on a little bit of a tangent. I think you're used to this by now. So going back to pleasure, which is the theme, can you acknowledge your motivation behind doing something and let yourself do it because it's fun? I'm training in capoeira now, and I admit it's like this cute little part of me that's like, oh, you know, like there's certain things that I don't think I'm going to be good at, you know, like I've got little stories about it, because I was a very sensitive, uncoordinated little child who had a lot of energy. It took me a long time to actually find my body, and I remind myself, like, Kat, like, you're not going to become a professional capoeira anything. You're just showing up to play. And, you know, oh, you're a little tired today. That's cool. You know, like, you show up to play. If you're a little tired, you can leave anytime you want. And that's how I kind of talk to myself. And it's interesting because if I put that low pressure of, like, we're just doing this to have fun, so if it stops being fun, you're allowed to, like, modify, I suddenly find that I can do moves that I never thought I could do because I take the pressure off. You know, and any athlete, if you watch any, like, high performance athlete, there's an ease in them, and there's a joy, but there's an ease. I remember someone, a swimming coach, pointing out this Olympic athlete swimmer that he used to coach, and he was like, "What do you see in that guy's strokes?" And at that time, I pushed and worked so hard, and I didn't know how to read the body that he was pointing to. And he's like, "Do you see how relaxed he is?" And, you know, as he said that, I was like, oh. And usually when we stress ourselves out, have high expectations, really do things according to just having that outcome, you know, it's not about the pleasure, we lose that relaxation. And honestly, being relaxed, whether it's sex, teaching, you know, learning new things, having a baby, you know, insert your other, like the creative process, driving, like being relaxed is so key. And will you gift yourself that I am going to notice when I have those expectations, and that even if mom and dad wired that in, or my ancestry or my schooling wired it in, I'm the one that's choosing to keep these voices in my field. I'm actually going to be like, you know what, dudes, like, I know you had a reason for why you're putting this pressure on, but we're just going to have some fun right now. Like, let me put some boundaries up. Like, we're going to have some fun. That's why I'm doing this. So that's my invitation to you is, you know, this gets to be our new normal, and that doesn't get to be bad news. It gets to be, you get to play differently in this reality. And are there ways that you're denying things that you've always wanted? You know, I had a good friend the other day who was like, I've always wanted to play guitar. You know, 20 years later, she's like, I think I'm going to do it. And how many of us deny that? And also to let yourself do it because you're like, I want to see what happens. Kurt Vonnegut, who, like, I love, you know, he in so many of his different writings really refers to the importance of doing things not because of talent or being good at it, but for the sheer pleasure, for the sheer experience of it. You know, like, there are many things that I've done that have given me a very colorful life, and it's not because I wanted to be the master. You know, and if you can be a master at being you, you've nailed it. You know, it's time to stop doing things for approval. If you want to be a rebel, it's not like, do you like me? Do you think I look good? You know, and it's more like, here I am. Sometimes a little this, sometimes a little that. I was watching an interview with Freddie Mercury yesterday, and you know, he was like, yep, sometimes I'm very organized and sometimes I'm very disorganized, you know, and because they kept trying to get him to, like, box himself in, and he's like, I'm just me, you know, like, that means I'm a little this and a little that. And the more we know ourselves, it's like, ooh, I am just as much of an introvert as an extrovert, you know, or I'm just as much of a this and as a that. And that's where suddenly personality becomes quite fascinating. Anyway, I could go on, but this is my morning love note to you. Time to have some breakfast and have a wonderful day. Bye.